Welcome to video 3 in Learning Module 4. This is about taking planning to the next step. Last video we talked about gaps and how we assess those in our campaign and how we create digital content that fills those gaps or bridges those gaps. So today we're moving beyond that and moving beyond the context and how we piece together a campaign, and we're moving into how we actually begin to create a core strategy that permeates our campaign and allows us to begin to set the tactics that we will choose. But those tactics are always based on a core strategy statement. So what we're going to do is talk about how we actually go about identifying and creating that core statement, strategy statement. So the question here is, what is our destination? And Halverson and Roch say that a core strategy is the guiding light that keeps you moving in the right direction no matter what might happen along the way. So in a content campaign or any campaign, we'll get bogged down in our day-to-day and we might lose track of where we actually might be going. So the idea is creating a core strategy that really guides us in whatever we do, that we can always look back to at any time and really figure out what our campaign is intending to do and to remind ourselves of that.
Identified as the gap that would
so there are three questions that we're going to answer in this short presentation.
To create this campaign was because they wanted
First
to
is, what is a core strategy?
Men's health and men's cancer. And
then how do you actually develop and define a core strategy?
Trigger that could be used.
And then what does a finished core strategy actually look like?
It.
So let's go through these questions, we'll answer them, and that'll be that. So what is a core strategy?
Would be something like,
first, it really defines how an organization will use a content campaign to achieve its objectives. So with that comes how content will meet a user's needs and how it will bridge the gap between where a user is and where they need to be in the future, as we talked about in video 1 this week.
Into a campaign.
It sets the long-term direction for all of your content-related initiatives.
One thing that they might have been
so it isn't short-term, it isn't one tiny piece. This is the whole long-term view that we're creating here.
TV and online,
and like we said before, it helps you withstand the weather and keeps you moving forward no matter what you may get bogged down in. This isn't necessarily something that should change on a day-to-day basis. This is really like that guidepost. There are that, that light that we talked about before that you can shine on your campaign, and that it will guide you.
We'll use Ellen's personality.
So what is a core strategy? What are kind of the attributes of a core strategy? The first is that a core strategy should be flexible, so that it should withstand the changing context environment, and it will accommodate various tactics.
The gap would be trust and likability in the new university
as you change tactics or as new technologies come up, that doesn't mean that you need to change your core strategy. It's just how you align those tactics to that core strategy. A core strategy should also be aspirational, which means that it is a stretch for your organization, and it really focuses on what you want to become ideally. It's not where you are right now, the immediate problems, but it's aspirational. It gives you something to reach towards. It's memorable, so that means that it's easily understandable, and it's used constantly to guide activities and to guide decisions. It's motivational, which means that it's worthwhile and it's exciting, and it's something that people want to be a part of. It should be, inspiring, and it should be something that gives you and your campaign energy. And it should also be inclusive. That means that it leaves room for a wide variety of individual contributions, of team contributions, so it isn't just one person. Many people can add to this core strategy. So how do you go about developing something that includes all of these points? The first is that you want to focus on what your content needs to do to close those gaps. So it's not the actual content itself, it's what that content needs to accomplish. You also want to take a pass on tactics. You don't want to focus on that day-to-day. You actually want to focus on that strategy from that bird's eye view. and you want to get aspirational. That means you want to focus on the destination, not the realities of today. So when you take all of these into account, that's how you begin to develop that core strategy, focusing on what your content needs to do. You want to talk strategy, not tactics, and you want to point to a destination. So how do you actually develop that core strategy? That is the big question here. So I'll take you through it, and I'll give you a couple examples of different content campaigns. So first, we want to take a look at the gap. And then I'll give you an example of what a core strategy is not. So it's less like this. And what a core strategy is. So it's more like this. So say that there's a campaign with a likability gap. In this example, it would be less like provide information for law students. And it would be more like, we're going to be the reference resource for stressed out law students. We're going to help them become successful, ethical, practicing attorneys. So the likability gap in something that just might be information for law students can actually close that likability gap by being something that is valuable to stressed out law students. So here's a campaign where the gap is trust. Here's a tactic, get on Twitter. But it should actually be more like, we'll meet the customer where they are, providing them with service that they deserve and where they need it the most. So you won't solve your trust gap by actually getting on Twitter. That doesn't mean anything. You can put 140 characters and have it say anything. The real core strategy here is actually servicing your customers and meeting them where they are and giving them the attention and the service that they deserve. And that is what's going to close the credibility gap or the trust gap, not Twitter itself. Here's a campaign with an ability gap. The competitor has a mobile site, we should too. Once again, that's a tactic, that's not a strategy. So the strategy here would be more like, we want to develop a state-of-the-art content infrastructure that makes it easy for us to adapt to the new device formats quickly. So it's not necessarily about being on a mobile site. It's really about adapting to the needs of users and being state-of-the-art so that you can service people and adapt to these newer formats quickly. So as you can see, we're taking the gap into account on the left, and in the middle, it's not a tactic. It is on the right. It's a strategy. The middle column, which is the tactic, does not actually solve the gap issue. It is just a means in which we would use the core strategy to solve it. So I hope this makes a difference in how you view tactics and strategies. Once again, tactics can be very arbitrary. They don't actually solve anything. Just by being on Facebook, just by being on Twitter, just by having a mobile website, just by providing information, you're not accomplishing your goal. You're not filling that gap. So what you want to do is have this core strategy that permeates everything that you do to solve that gap. So number 3, what does a finished strategy actually look like? Number 1, it's not a huge document. It can be as short as a sentence, because remember, it has to be memorable. A huge document is not necessarily something you're going to remember by heart. It's a short sentence. It's also a simple statement. It's quick and it's memorable. It takes those gaps into account and explains how to create a content campaign that addresses those gaps and bridges those gaps. And it shows a final destination. It paints a picture of a future without these gaps that we've identified. So let's bring it home here. Let's take a look at the case studies that we've taken a look at in the past to really illustrate how they used a core strategy rather than any tactics in order to solve the problems and be a successful case study. So we'll take a look at the case study itself, what we have identified as a gap for the campaign that they were trying to solve, and then what might have been an example of their core strategy statement. So let's take a look at Movember. What they identified as the gap that would
be used in part as the reason to create this campaign was because they wanted to solve the problem of awareness of men's health and men's cancer. And also they recognized that there was not necessarily a trigger that could be used to do something about it, and that's what the campaign was trying to solve. So an example of what their core strategy statement might have been would be something like, we'll bring awareness to the idea of men's cancer and reduce the barriers that men may have in talking about this issue. We'll create a campaign that is fun and easy to participate in and use a symbol that's instantly recognizable, that it can show the participation and lower that barrier to entry into a campaign. For Ellen, one thing that they might have been trying to solve is the likability of daytime talk shows. And then also because TV and online had traditionally been separate before something like Ellen came on the air, and the separation between TV and media, what is the trigger to engage online and to take that TV and that traditional media and bring it to social media? And so their core strategy statement might have been something like, we'll use Ellen's personality and her creativity to engage with our audience in new ways, inspiring them to bridge the divide between TV and online. And then for the University of Cincinnati, our President Ono, the gap would be trust and likability and the new university president. So their core strategy statement, or President Ono's strategy statement, might have been something like, we'll create a friend of mine style campaign that shows that our president is approachable and that he views the student body as important and worthy of making time and making sacrifices for.
So, like I said, I ran through all of these case studies, the gap that they perceived, and then the core strategy statement that isn't necessarily the exact one they came up with, but it is an example of what a core strategy statement could have been to bridge that gap that they perceived in column 2. So that is the example of how you come up with a core strategy statement. Once again, it's going to be something short. It's going to be something that bridges the gap, but it also gives you an idea of a destination, a place where there is no gaps. So this week we're going to have an assignment. It's going to be posted on the board, and it's going to be taking a look at how we actually assess the gaps in your group projects, and then how we create core strategy statements. So we're going to make this a discussion this week so that we can all discuss what we think the gaps might be, and then come up with examples of what a core strategy could be. This will give you a lot of practice and will give a lot of discussion around what these gaps are and what these core strategy statements are, so that we can all get on the same page for your group projects. So take a look at that, and that'll be due at the end of this learning module.